Hello, friends. I, Ankita Datta, project lead for the Mask series at www.tellmeyourstory.biz, welcome you to the seventh episode of The Mask Factor. I'm privileged to have with us author Dr. Nath Pathak this evening, and we are going to discuss a word, an era, a story, and the significance of them all. Tell Me Your Story calls for submissions of short stories and poems on Mask. Also, registrations are open for the writing program season 2 with the story prompt of Women's Silence, which is yet another form of Mask. So let me begin by introducing Dev sir. Dr. Nath Pathak is a founding faculty of sociology at South Asian University, a university of SAARC in New Delhi, India. He has been writing on folklore, art, cinema, mediated communications, theories, and philosophy. His upcoming book is titled In Defense of the Ordinary Everyday Awakenings. He has authored and edited many others apart from being in the editorial boards of academic journals. He was a visiting scholar at Brown International Advanced Research Institute at Brown University, a Charles Wallace Fellow at Queen's University Belfast, a visiting scholar at Indian Institute of Advanced Studies, Shimla, and scholar in residence at Indian Institute of Management, Calcutta. He is associated with Galp Lok, a YouTube based public intellectual forum. Welcome, sir. We hope that you and your loved ones are safe and sound. So, how do you perceive these change times? Like, are these times really as horrific as it is being painted, or do you see things with a peach tinted sunglass?
Uh, I would say tinted sunglasses is also good for eyes, uh, practically speaking. But then sunglasses cannot filter all kind of visuals. I mean, we can only minimize the effect in terms of the light and all. But then the visuals register. We are living with those visuals. Those visuals are not apart from us. uh, the amount of death, fear, paranoia. Most healthy person with the seemingly healthy habits would also become uh, uh, scared of variety of things, all kind of disease, stories of disease. I mean, there's some kind of morbidity almost in day-to-day life, which one cannot ignore. So yes, in terms of minimizing the effect of the light, one can wear tinted glasses, but then one cannot filter those images, those impressions.
Thank you, sir. So, I, on behalf of Team TMYS, extend our heartiest congratulations on your upcoming novel. So, would you please introduce to the audience the premise of the book? I mean, what made you attempt such a work?
Ankita, thank you. I mean, there is a good Freudian slip when you say you call it a novel, and I would not correct you. It's not entirely wrong in the sense that there is novelish uh, intentions in the backdrop, novelish objectives in the backdrop, in terms of the craft of presentation of the material in the book. There is some sort of ambition of a novelist. However, it is a non-fiction work, and therefore, in that typical category of novel, it may not fit. But then uh, there is an appeal of different kind which you usually come across in a novel. Why do I say this? Because the breed of writing that I am more familiar with, given my academic training and location in an academic institution, and conversation because of the institutional affiliation, conversation with the fellow writers, academic writers primarily based in universities. We all know that anything we call non-fictional is hardcore non-fictional. Is primarily data driven, right? it has sound arguments, very well-bodied presentation. But then, if I look at this modest attempt made in this book, I believe this would probably be distinguishable from the larger variety of non-fiction writing that we are familiar with amongst ourselves. Why different? Because of the objective that you have asked about, the kind of ideas in the backdrop, also the ideas which get foregrounded in this work. What is the first thing? First thing first. Most of us are trained to provide to our work some kind of, if I can say, Midas touch. That Greek character, character from Greek mythology, after whom this famous Midas touch is a proverbial usage. With Midas touch, you turn anything into gold. And the king, that king in Greek mythology who had the power to turn anything into gold, eventually got into trouble by touching his own daughter, and who turns into gold. And then he longs for that daughter in flesh and blood, that ordinary creature we call human, with whom we relate. Gold we may value, but we do not, beyond a point, do not relate with the gold, with any kind of element, metallic element. So the first thing which was at the back of my mind, that this should not be, this should be kept away from, this work should be kept away from that scholar's Midas touch, in which we are all trained through our readings, through our conversations, through our institutional practices. There is this entire system which expects you to deliver that Midas touch. It's not only in the realm of scholarship, it's also in the realm of market, in terms of commercial value, also in terms of the larger system of ranking and so on and so forth, peer review. So here the purpose was to undertake certain kind of risk-prone intellectual journey and keep aside that Midas touch and let the simple be simple. Which means if the book is to deal with the issue of ordinary, let ordinariness come to the foreground. So here, very purposefully, the author puts aside some of those very well-known jargons, theoretical approaches, conceptual apparatus with which we are very familiar and we are very comfortable in employing them. At any point of time, even in my day-to-day conversation, I might slip into that mode which allows me to employ my conceptual apparatus with which I think. When I talk in a classroom, probably it will be an inevitable requirement. One has to use some of those concepts and theories. But even in the classroom discourse as a pedagogue, we realize that in addition to those conceptual, those theoretical, those philosophical ideas, we need to provide with the sweat and blood, the dust and grime of experiential life. Many of us as pedagogues request our students to think through what they are, what they go through, what they dwell. We invite them to resort to their own dwelling while listening to any scholar or while reading any scholar, while learning about something from texts, prescribed texts. We request them to be a little experiential and not just get into the business of accumulating disembodied knowledge. We That is also our job as a pedagogue, to pave the way for students and for our fellow peers to relate to us through certain kind of embodied experiential knowledge and not just disembodied, detached kind of knowledge. There is value to detached knowledge. Nobody can deny that. But then, even in the realm of pure, hardcore science, we know, and many scholars have written about it, many philosophers of sciences have written about it, that even scientists who work in laboratory are not entirely detached from what they do. Their conclusions may sound detached and therefore available for becoming universal law. But then arriving this whole journey to that conclusion is very embodied journey. So if that is the case with scholars, why not it should also reflect in our writing? And that was the purpose in the backdrop, that if I am talking about ordinary, let the fulsomeness of ordinary come to the fore. Let the details, some of the details of ordinariness, determine certain kind of insights, arguments, and that is maintained here. In short, if I have to say, uh, because we experience theatrics, histrionics, dramatics of ordinary life every day, right? Without failing. In pandemic, we felt it probably more acutely because the most familiar kind of ordinary life was not easily accessible. But even before pandemic, some of us who were self-reflective, self-critical, we realized that there is good deal of drama associated with ordinary, right? Even the most banal, something most insignificant, which will cross my eyes, but I may not pay attention because I'm in a hurry, or I don't recognize value of it. But even the most banal, if you pay attention to it, if you are living your life, ordinary life, with full attention to everything that you're passing by, you would find that even the most banal, seemingly most insignificant stuff will be dramatic enough, will have an affective bearing upon us. You never know what can move you to tears, even though you may be hardcore sadist, so to say. And that we come across, that we encounter very frequently. We do not know what in our day-to-day life can touch us so deeply. Something so dry, which appears dry prima facie, may make you very wet. That kind of magic of mundane. So if those things are there all around us, and if I'm writing about them, how can I reduce them into abstract formulations? How can how can I make them, as an author, as a craftsman, divorced from their charm? So here, the challenge to the craftsman, which is the author of this book, was to maintain that enchanting value of ordinary. This is just to give you a slightly longer answer to the question as to why and what I did when I thought of the book.
Thank you, sir. But it was interesting to hear, obviously. So, the mask factor is an amalgamation of conversations where people from all fields join hands to describe the very common mask. So, from that perspective, how would you react if I were to say that often a book is the portrayal of flared up, repressed desires? I mean, is this book of yours going to be one such depiction?
Very good question. I wanted to come to it as soon as possible. Um, and this discussion about the book is not merely supposed to be about the book. I fully acknowledge that the mask factor, which is tacit as well as very overt many times in this book in various chapters. Um, uh, uh, that mask factor is to be discussed in terms of the variety of roles that we assume in our ordinary lives. We do not consider them masks because we associate, just like we have attributed negative notions to the word like drama in day-to-day life. If there is a dramatic performance in a proscenium theater, we may not look down upon it because we know that it's an established format of performance. But in day-to-day life, if we have a friend who is very dramatic, uh, you would know that we never shy away from giving this generous remark that, you know what, uh, every now and then you, at the drop of hat, you perform some kind of histrionic, now give it a stop or something like that. We remember that cult cinema in Hindi, Sholay, and that famous dialogue of Viru's friend Jay, the characters. And Jay always says in that typical Amitabh Bachchan baritone voice, ये घड़ी घड़ी ये साला घड़ी घड़ी drama करता है, right? We use the similar kind of remark for many of our political leaderships. We know we need not name any of them. It's uh, full of risk these days to name any of them. So we have all sorts of dramatic personae around. In fact, the most successful politician would be the one who is best at putting up a mask of certain kind. And if another political leadership has not been accepted as yet as a leader, it's precisely because the mask he or she is wearing is not convincing enough. In day-to-day life too, we wear masks. However, we don't say that it is just a mask. And this mask is almost integral to our skin. It is second skin. There are scholars of performance studies who have argued along this line that in a performance, your mask is your second skin, which means that it is so nicely stitched to your face, to your body, that you do not consider it separable from you, and therefore you do not deem it equal to mask. But the truth is that we have masks and we keep changing masks. Sometimes in certain kind of situation, if we define situation as per the definitions given in social psychology, in certain kind of situations, we wear a mask about which we are very happy, but the situation changes and we also realize certain things about the performance value of that mask, and we decide to change our mask, so and so forth. This is like, if you really look at ourselves in the scheme of ordinary, we find that we are wearing one mask after another mask, and sometimes we never know. There are occasions when we realize that there are masks underneath our masks too, right? So that is the case here in this book also, when I try to unfold the complex trope of ordinary, right? There is nothing to romanticize ordinary here. The title of the book is In Defense of the Ordinary, just to attract the people who would be skeptical about ordinary stuff, precisely because we are living in a time of extraordinary. Everything that we love, we imagine them to be extraordinary. So in that regard, it's a bit of defense, but it's not a romantic defense, which means it recognizes the various layers of ordinary itself, the rivaling claims of ordinary, the contestations within ordinary, right? That is one thing. The mask factor in the book is also in another regard, which is about the idea of author, right? In the beginning, it's touched upon in the book, but throughout the book, I was conscious of one fact, that there is a strange politics of pronouns that happens in the book, which means that you never know when I is replaced by you is replaced by we is replaced by they. You never know who becomes other to whom at what point of time in the book, in the discussion. That's very strange. I allowed this thing to happen, that kind of intuitive politics of pronoun. It's very well stated in the beginning of the book. Throughout the book, it is not being discussed, but throughout the book, one can feel that politics of pronoun. And that politics of pronoun is a very strong revelation of the changing masks in the scheme of ordinary, right? That is also done with the intention that, this narrative of one pronoun, which is, say, for example, I of the author of the book, that narrative of one pronoun is never, ever detached from the narrative of the other pronoun, right? When I'm telling you this story, I don't know at what point of time my story crisscrosses your story, right? And therefore, the switch from I to you to they to we, right? That switch should be allowed. It is some sort of hazard, in the sense that a copy editor will have tough time, and my copy editor did have a little bit of challenge in this regard. But it is also well defended in the sense that that the scheme of ordinary demands from us that ability to see the relation of the author with others and others with the author. In such a strong way, this relationship unfolds that the other, who is not the author seemingly of the book in technical sense, joins the author. Right? This will take anybody who is familiar with this kind of debate about who is the author back to very well celebrated interjections along this line. I have no intention to do name dropping, but if one is interested, Roland Barthes, Michel Foucault, and some other philosophers and theorists who have contributed along this line. And we realize that, the changing pronouns or the extensions of authorship within one technically authored book, technically authored by one person, that itself is a revelation on the variety of masks one comes across in a text like this.
Thank you so much, sir. Your answers are really interesting to hear. So your novel, or I would say your nonfiction, has already opened to rave reviews by eminent personalities from different walks of life. So, how do these feedbacks reflect upon your mindset, like your thoughts about the receiving of the book? And I also have a follow-up question. Why do you believe the subject connects to people from different walks of life?
Yeah, two different sets of questions. To begin with, let me answer the first one. Some of these advanced reviews by, I would say, celebrated scholars whose work I seriously follow. Some of them are public intellectuals. Some of them are hardcore academics, philosophers, historians, anthropologists. Their work I really follow, and they had good things to say. Some of those also humbled me a great deal, because I still consider this very experimental project. Why experimental? Because see, some of us began to realize that the academic scholarship is largely trapped in ivory tower. Some of these phrases we have heard quite often. We have heard it from friends doing journalism. We have heard it from friends who are directly associated with public life. We have also heard this kind of self-critical realization within university academia, that our writings are only for ourselves. We write for ourselves. We speak in echo chamber. We listen to our own voices. Our writings are not available for others, so on and so forth. We are mostly jargon driven, the same Midas touch phenomenon. And I realize that, we talk about this, but we never make sufficient endeavor to move ahead from this. We know for sure that we cannot debunk, we cannot abandon everything that we have learned from the classics, right? Classics in social sciences. But how to engage with them, how to move ahead from them, how to respond to them in our time, when we have become critical about certain ways of our expressions, certain ways of writing, certain ways of talking, right? That was so in that regard, this is a very modest response to suggest that, what, I can be informed by theories, philosophies, concepts, categories of all sorts, and arguments which have been delivered to us by our predecessors. But then, in the meanwhile, it is my responsibility to respond to this self-critical realization that my way of expression has to change, that I don't have to talk only for my peers. I have to talk to my peers. My peers should understand the intellectual value of whatever I offer. But in the meantime, my offering has to be for the public at large, right? So if I'm talking about ordinary, how can I not say it in the manner in which, so that it is also accessible to the ordinary readership? So there would be a lot of poetry, stories, anecdotes, instances from scholarship woven into all those things which may appear non-scholarly that will come together in this book. So it's very humbling to hear some of those kind of advanced reviews. They really boost my confidence, and probably I will pursue this kind of project even in future. Um, this is to come to your second question. This is important to do something like this also because in all walks of life we encounter variety of crusades against ordinary. A child, 6-year-old child, always feels at loss to see that he or she has not performed extraordinarily, right? The model that comes from Indian Idol seems to have become all pervasive model in our day-to-day life, right? In everything one has to be very good performer, right? I have a little child at home who plays chess with all sorts of anonymous chess players online, and sometimes he wins, sometimes he loses. Every time he has lost in a game, he feels very sad. And his point is that he does self-analysis of his own game, of his own moves. And his point is that, what? I played that move very ordinarily. I did not think beyond the ordinary impulse. And why? That makes me worry as to why somebody, a child, gets nervous about certain moves as ordinary, right? Why every move is supposed to be extraordinary? Why every move is supposed to be immaculate, perfect? Why is every move aimed at making one successful in any game? All around us, we have games laid out to us. In the society, in the apartments where we live, in the villages where we live, we every now and then we come across discursive games, right? Two people talking, more than two people talking, there is a discursive game going on. Who can outdo others? And to outdo others, one has to perform smartly, extraordinarily, right? I have many friends. Unfortunately, I've been surrounded by friends in academics who always boast that they understand techno legal detailing of everything very well, right? They are extraordinary precisely because they claim, because they understand the law book very well, law book of the institution very well, and therefore they know how to manipulate with that law, right? Therefore they know how to create techno legal hassles for their colleagues. That is their source of being extraordinary, right? Many of my friends, your friends, friends of friends, relatives of relatives, many of, even in relationship, even in kinship, we come across these kind of discursive games all around us. Even in our marital alliances, even in our emotional associations, we tend to calculate as to how I can be extraordinary, how I can transcend that ordinariness, without realizing that by doing all these things, by playing so well to become spectacular, to become extraordinary, you have resorted to another fold of ordinariness, right? You don't become extraordinary just because you have played certain moves very well, right? So here the idea is to show that the struggle between Dalit and Brahmins, on one hand it is in society, but on the other hand it is also in various walks of life. It is also in our institutional lives. Brahmins, if you consider the word Brahmin as a metaphor for oppression and dominance, that is everywhere. And there are those people who would be very oppressive, very dominating, and they will try to appear very pure, very perfect, very knowledgeable, just like Brahmins in olden times or even now in society. So, it is in every walk of life that we come across, even in DDA societies where we live. We see that RWA becomes that kind of Brahminical institution, right? The leaders of RWA would be every now and then flaunting as to how well they know techno-legal details, right? And on that ground, they can afford to be blind to some of the very ordinary sensibility that is required of humans in general. That's not only in RWA, it's everywhere you go, you would see this. You go to police department, you go to any bureaucratic organization, you will come across similar kind of thing. That one is always trying to show that one is above ordinary, and yet one is very, very well within yet another realm of ordinariness. It is up to us. Here, I just extend my answer to your question. It is entirely up to us when we begin to recognize that these are all various folders in the realm of ordinary, and we have to do stock taking, soul searching, and figure out as to which ordinary is more suitable for humans like us, which ordinary would be more life affirming for us, which ordinariness is more human friendly, is more life friendly, is more environment friendly, whatever is our concern, is more gender friendly, which ordinary is more caste, um, uh, would be less hierarchical, which ordinariness would be less oppressive, which ordinariness would be more transformative, more egalitarian, more equality based. What kind of ordinary friendship would amount to suggesting friendship of good spirits and not just two calculative minds, so and so forth.
Thank you, sir. Thank you so much for this. And I'll take a cue from your answer to ask my next question, that when you defend the ordinary, you trod the extraordinary spheres while also becoming one of them eventually through your act of defending the periphery. So, did this idea take up the blankness of the paper? Like, have you ever pondered on the state of chaos it would create while defining clear boundaries?
Yeah. Ankita, I thought I will not face this question. I am sure this is the question I would be answering several times from now on, once this book is in the hand of public reviewers and peers, critical peers. But good to see that this is here as well. Um, this is a typical fear. I mean, what really perpetuates this kind of fear that nature is chaotic, nature has to be regulated. That old British thinker, philosopher, also considered to be propounder of modern empiricism first time, Francis Bacon, and his famous book Novum Organum, that that is also, if you see that book, on one hand it offers you a romantic view of nature, on the other hand it also generates fear of nature, and therefore it advocates certain kind of rational attitude to nature, so as we can regulate nature eventually, right? This whole discussion about wild to be domesticated, and if not domesticated, then it has to be left in the wilderness, right? This whole attitude of breaking the horses, free horses will be dangerous for us. It's also in the Greek thought. I mean, if you go back to Aristotle and all, you will find that they were all plagued by this idea that the horse with proper steed, with proper saddle, only that kind of horse with broken leg. Broken means controlled, entirely controlled horse. Only that kind of horse can be used in a chariot. Otherwise, a freewheeling horse will be dangerous for a chariot. The charioteer would not be able to control that horse. Or something in Shakespearean drama you hear, taming the shrew. You have strong fear of shrew. I mean, these kind of things we have heard several times. Nature is chaotic and therefore it has to be regulated. And that whole idea of regulating the nature eventually ended into progress of humanity at the price of nature, because controlling the nature, regulating the nature was actually a way of exploiting the nature. And it has led us to the pandemic. Or there are many factors which have led us to pandemic, but it has led us to a particular way of living which is not good for us, seemingly. Like the fact that during the lockdown, everybody had to struggle with the household chores only reveals that, We might have acquired wealth, acquired comfort at the price of living with these kind of ordinary chores, which may have it may be backbreaking, no doubt about it. At the end of the day, it is very tiring, but then it may also have hum of life. It may also have its instantaneous, inherent musical property, right? It may also have certain kind of sense of liberation by doing all those things. Even though you're not doing it for a long time, you know for sure that the lockdown is lifted and all your house help will start coming, and you'll be freed from this compulsion of doing all the household chores. But then while doing those things, and even if you have someone to look after your babies, the babysitters, we know for sure that there is nothing like the association between parents and babies. Doing all those things for babies. This is in one of the chapters in this book. I really relish that thing of cleaning their body, making them do their day-to-day things. The kind of relationship that evolves between parents and babies, that's really marvelous. And I really regret that these kids grow up so fast. I mean, if I had really a magical wand like Harry Potter, the first thing I should have done was to seize the growth of these babies. I mean, let them be babies for a longer while. I mean, when you read J.K. Rowling's that series of novels on Harry Potter novels, you felt that in first 2-3 volumes, the effect of the personalities of these kids, all these protagonists, was so strong on you, right? That the mythology really looked like, right, really felt like mythology. J.K. Rowling's mythology, Harry Potter's mythology, right? The whole Hogwarts school was actually real precisely because of this, very winsome kind of, child characters that you had, which were presenting these stories to you. But then as they grew up, you realize that it has all become very scientific, very rational now, right? It's the same rational struggle of power that you encounter in the latter part of Harry Potter. So it's not only about Harry Potter, it's also in our day-to-day life. We all grow up so much. I mean, we all become so-called mature minds that, we stop taking interest in some of these simpler things. And also, to justify our distance, we start saying these things that, there would be chaos. If I don't regulate, there would be chaos. I am a big film buff. I watch all kind of movies, but every now and then I return to my favorite filmmaker, Hrishikesh Mukherjee, one of those who came out of Bimal Roy's famous Factory. Bimal Roy's time in Hindi cinema was considered the golden period of Hindi cinema, and it actually was. So Bimal Roy's series of films, all sorts of films you watch, and then you come to later part of Hrishikesh Mukherjee, and he makes a film called Jhuti with Rekha in lead, and Rekha is in lead, and who is the villainous character? Dina Pathak, the grand old lady who is very particular about rules, and her point is precisely this: that if you do not follow all these rules, there will be chaos. Whereas the other protagonist, the younger character, suggests that no, if you do not follow these rules, there would be another kind of order which will emerge in freedom. We have my serious complaint about myself as well as about my fellow humans is that we have not allowed this another kind of order to emerge from this state of freedom. This is not about chaos. This is about state of freedom. In state of freedom also, there would be certain boundaries. Who says there would not be any boundary? But probably the quality of those boundaries would be different from the kind of boundaries that we come across in this kind of very structured, very imposed notion of order. Structured, imposed notion of boundaries, right? So that delineating effect is too strong in a very formal kind of structuring. But there is certain kind of structuring which happens from within us, right? And that kind of structuring is more likely to give us moments of awakenings. I would not say it would be revolutionary in the sense in which some of my revolutionary friends would like to imagine revolution. It might be small bit of revolutions if there has to be. If it might be, it might be very modest kind of radicalism which will unfold. In this regard, I'm guided by a Marxist psychoanalyst, someone like Eric Fromm, if I have to mention this name, and semiotics scholars, some of the semiotic scholars, some of the phenomenologists such as Marley Ponty, right? Some of the anthropologists as well, who have all shown us as to how in this informal structuring, also there would be certain kind of boundaries. Boundaries do not disappear. There is no chaos. But then there is a vested interest in not letting it happen. There is a vested interest from all around us, which will not allow you this everyday awakening. It will not allow you to stand aside and say that, you know what, I am not part of this crusade which is against ordinariness. In our university life, I have seen that, you know, the whole institutional system of higher education in South Asia is such, and abroad they have started talking about it, but unfortunately in South Asia nobody talks about it, that the whole institutional structuring of higher education is done in such a manner that every teacher has this inculcated idea that it is not fruitful to be just an ordinary teacher. One has to be game player. One has to learn those techno-legal things and outdo each other. One has to, it's not good to be just ordinary teacher. One has to become something. Something like what? Head of department. Can you believe this? Something like what? Dean of student. Something like what? Provost. So and so forth. This kind of administrative position. If you were dying to occupy these administrative positions, you should not have come to higher education. You should not have decided to become a teacher, because teacher is supposed to be inherently ordinary. If we just follow some of the educationists, such as Paulo Freire, such as Jiddu Krishnamurti, teachers are supposed to be inherently ordinary in the sense that they are supposed to be very open for various kind of relationism to be employed in the pedagogic practices. Unfortunately, scholars, when they teach, they are not open for variety of relationism. They're always judging a student. They're always in the business of evaluating and eliminating. They're hardly in the business of forging pedagogic relations, which will be long lasting, which will be more useful for our intellectual life as such. So this is slightly longer answer to your questions.
Thank you, sir. It's okay. We don't have a time limit, so it's fine. So my next question would be: you are a sociologist, and your novel is an unmasking of the same society and its norms that you are also a part of. So society constitutes us, and we are social beings. This unmasking, is it disturbing? I mean, does this bring about man's failure or directs a new ray of hope?
Very good question. No, here this unmasking is not to unmask and debunk. There has been this long established practice particularly amongst scholars or investigative journalists, to unmask something so as it could be trashed eventually. Here, the idea is not to trash. I mean, who am I to suggest trashing, right? That will be too big a proposition. Here, the idea is to see as to how it is, right? How these crusades are alongside the flourishing ordinariness. How variety of various layers of ordinary stays. For example, I give you an example which is very dear to me, and it is there in this book, probably in third or fourth chapter. It's about this whole idea of truth claim, right? Everybody is in the business of truth claim these days. You know what? Anybody who says, I know more, is basically a contestant in the data war. There is a massive data war all around. Government says only these many people died. We know from some other sources, no, there are too many volumes of people have died. It's not just like that we saw floating dead bodies in the river and cremation by the roadside, so and so forth. My point is that in this whole game of truth claim, in this whole data war, we compromise on our basic sensibility that we have it's hard to believe that certain kind of humans who we call trolls will not have that sensitivity. They're trolls because they are part of certain kind of system. There is a systemic requirement for them to be nasty, brutish, unreasonable, irrational, so on and so forth. But then it's hard to believe that as humans, those trolls will not have these ordinary sensibilities, right? So my point is here to understand the layers, contesting layers, rivaling claims within this data war, right? And also stand aside from the data war, which is played out in the name of truth claims of various kinds. Stand aside from it and try to see as to what truth could be really. So here, I mean, while talking about the ways of seeing the ordinary in this book, I try to put together some of the things that we have often heard, right? We have heard in Hindi speaking areas, in Hindi heartland of India, every growing child in villages and small towns might have heard a saying like this: झूठ बोलना पाप है, नदी किनारे सांप है और वही तुम्हारा बाप है. Now, every child like me who grew up listening to this kind of thing was really scared of telling a lie, because we did not want to imagine our very dear father like a snake at some point of time just because of my mistake of lying. But then we heard this. We also heard something so glorifying such as Satyam, Shivam, Sundaram. Every now and then, my father used to say, you're very bitter in terms of telling truth. You should learn this Sanskrit saying Satyam Vad, Priyam Vad, so and so forth. All kind of Subhashitani in Sanskrit we mugged up. But we also realize that there are other kind of things, such as our favorite rhyme, which I listen to my children, and I'm reminded of all sorts of rhymes, such as Johnny, Johnny, yes, Papa, eating sugar, no, Papa, telling a lie, no, Papa, open your mouth, ha, ha, ha. Now, what do you conclude out of it, right? So there has been interplay of truth and lie in our ordinary lives, right? If we have lived with that interplay so nicely and we have laughed about it, we have also heard in mythological tales, we have heard so many stories which would bring about similar kind of interface of truth and lie. Say, for example, Krishna telling his foster mother Yashoda that what, I have not stolen creams from anybody's household, but he has a milk cream smeared all over his face, all over his hand. Foster mother Yashoda says, क्या बोलते हो, झूठ बोलते हो, देखो तो तुम्हारे हाथ में पूरा लगा हुआ है, मुंह में लगा हुआ है. He says he's still he sticks to his guns and he says, no, they're all lying. No, don't believe this, what is on my face, on my hand. No, I'm not red-handed. I'm not caught red-handed or white-handed or cream-handed. No, I am lying. They are all lying against me. I am telling you the truth. I have not stolen anybody's cream. Then Yashoda says, okay, fine, open your mouth. Just like Johnny's father says, open your mouth, right? And Johnny's father and Johnny himself starts laughing when he's caught that he was actually eating sugar. Likewise, here also Krishna is caught eating milk cream, stolen milk cream. And then he opens his mouth and what does he show his mother? There is a famous picture theory of Mitchell, which harps on this idea of seeing, showing. And that whole idea unfolds in this particular episode from mythology. When Krishna opens his mouth, his mother gets to see the whole universe in it. There is a cosmology that unfolds out of that mouth. Now, this has to be extended further into a larger debate, which will give you this idea, very simple idea, that there is an interplay of truth and lie. Actually, if you recognize honestly, you understand that lies are far more powerful than truth. This is high time that we begin to undervalue lies in terms of the power, the effective power of lie. I'm not saying that in terms of, the judgment about lie and truth. I'm saying that, one has to recognize the power of lie. Lies can be presented in such creative manner that it will have long-lasting enchantment value. Truth also demands from the supporters of truth similar kind of creativity. Unfortunately, all those who complain that liberalism has failed, fascism has come over us, they have to recognize that the truth of liberalism probably required a little more creativity, a little more affect value, which was lacking. And in comparison, fascism always comes with great deal of melodrama. An equally convincing melodrama, or maybe more convincing melodrama, had to emerge on behalf of liberalism too. And it is still a challenge as to how to cultivate that melodrama which will be suitable within the framework of liberalism. That is the concern here. And with that concern, one is trying to suggest that, let's not fall prey to this well established mode of debating truth and lies. Let's step aside from that, truth claim in which the binary of truth and lie has become so ossified, so reified. It's almost like fetish of truth that everybody worships, right? And because of that fetish of truth, you would realize that we invariably join in data war. Everybody is in the business of gathering data. I do not deny the importance of collecting data, but then data itself has never been sufficient. What stories do you perpetuate? What stories do you cultivate out of those data? That is the most important part, right? So while answer, I got carried away. I really forgot what was your question.
Sir, I asked you that this unmasking, is it disturbing? I mean, to
Right.
you as a sociologist.
Yeah. So with this kind of position on way of seeing the ordinary, in which one is not willing to give into this data war, one is not willing to give into this well-established discursive game of truth claims. In that kind of scheme, the purpose is not to unmask for trashing. The purpose is just to, it's just like this. Imagine this scenario. You're watching a performer. Say, for example, you're watching a Behrupia performer. Behrupias are now getting forgotten by and large, but they're few and far between all around India. If you go to watch their performance and you become friendly with them, after a while you say that, आपका ये थोड़ा मास्क उठा के देखते हैं आप कौन है इसके अंदर में, या आपका ये मेकअप हटा के देखते हैं कि आप कौन है इस मास्क के अंदर में, ये जो आपने रूप बनाया हुआ है बाहर से उसके अंदर में क्या है जरा झांक कर देख लेते हैं. So that is the act being done here. Here unmasking is not to, अरे तुम्हारा mask, you're hiding something behind your mask, let me take it off and trash it and then let me see your truth. No, it's not that spirit. Here the spirit is to be that childlike spectator who is willing to just get a glimpse of इसके पीछे क्या है जरा देख के फिर छोड़ दीजिए उसको. That is not our business to unmask and trash and say that what you're bad. No, here the child is willing to say that emperor is naked, not to immediately drive that emperor to go to his wardrobe and find the finest of suit and put it on and say that what, I'm no longer naked. Here the child wants to cackle, get into the peal of, burst into the peal of laughter and laugh aloud and say that, what, emperors happen to be naked every now and then. The idea is not to get into that civilization mode, right? Idea is not to say that, all those who have masks on are savages and we will teach them how to live without the masks. Idea is to see what is behind those masks. How many masks are there? What are the qualities of those masks? Which mask may be suitable for us? Which mask, if I have to, one fine morning decide that today I'm going to put on a mask, which mask should I put on? I need to decide that only if I will know about the quality of all those masks, only if I have seen those masks, examined those masks, only then I will be able to decide that this mask I'm going to put on today. So this is not for trashing, and therefore it does not give discomfort. It gives joy. Yes, it gives an opportunity to be sarcastic at times, looking at certain kind of masks. So there is a great deal of sarcasm in the narrations, in the presentations in this book. I really relish the art of polemics. So here there was this full pleasure to get into the polemics about various kind of masks, but it is not at all with the spirit of truth claim, about which we are more familiar in our writings, in our social science researches, even in investigative journalism, and in day-to-day life. We hear from all sorts of proponents of truths, all sorts of babas come up with their own truth claim. They might get contested on a television channel, but they don't stop vending their truth claims. And that kind of truth claim business is not suitable here. The idea of truth is here never divorced from the idea of lie. And I reiterate my point that here actually it is being suggested that lies have been far more powerful, and therefore we find that great deal of mythological tales are still in circulation, right? I'll stop answering this question by just saying that, in spite of the fact that we have heard so many love tales, so many love stories we have heard, but at any point of time in our life, even till death bade, we will not be able to say that, I have had enough of love stories. We'll be always ready to listen to another love story. Why? Precisely because, those interesting, enchanting, mythological, legendary, lie-like or make-believe kind, those are always powerful. And those are to be seen in relation with truth claims.
Yes, sir. Thank you so much for this lovely answer. We have a few audience questions coming up as well, but we will take them after we conclude our formal session. So let us move on to my seventh question. As we look up to the show off, to the glitter and the shiny, we often try to improve ourselves by directly imitating or learning the shadow culture. So our standards go up and our livelihood gets affected, some endure and some collapse. So it is indeed subject to risks, but at a point, is it also not necessary? I mean, could we be urbanized otherwise? Could we adapt to the hint of the modern world?
Nobody is against progress. At any point of time, nobody can be against progress or against development. And development will happen. Even if some of us would be against it, it will always happen. It's human nature, is the property of nature itself that it moves ahead, right? It brings about its own kind of devastation. There will be calamities, there will be devastations, there will be all sorts of consequences, and the grind mill will not stop, right? It's like an anthropologist, A.R. Redcliffe Brown, long ago said that even if the whole village dies in an epidemic, the structure, the social structure in that village will remain. It's like that. So nobody is advocating anything against progress. Progress will happen at any cost. However, one is wondering about what kind of progress, number one, and one is also wondering great deal about the prevalent mindset which is related to progress, which is related to development. All right, so criticism of development is one kind of genre of expression for us, but there is another kind of genre of expression which is criticism of developmentalism, criticism of the mindset which is in favor of certain kind of development. So one has to distinguish criticism of development from criticism of developmentalism, criticism of progress and criticism of mindset associated with progress, criticism of vision associated with. Here, I am more inclined to offer a criticism of the vision of progress. And it does not mean by any chance that this criticism of the vision of progress means an advocacy against progress. There cannot be any advocacy against progress. Progress will happen. However, if we are adequately criticizing the vision of progress, if we are adequately criticizing the mindset, if we are adequately criticizing developmentalism, when I say developmentalism, one has to understand that in the term developmentalism is the ism which becomes far more powerful than development itself, right? It is this ism on the ground of which all kind of political manipulation also takes place, right? We, as ordinary voters, we only see the idea of development catered to us, but we do not see what kind of developmentalism is being catered to us, right? And that's where the job of some of us is very ordinary kind of actors' job is to wake up every day, read newspaper every day, and figure out as to what kind of mindset is being perpetuated, right? Mindset associated with development. And one has to figure out whether this mindset being perpetuated really uh, uh, is capable of bringing about any development. Is merely infrastructural facility a development? Yes, it is a kind of development. But is that enough to be called development? What about the other kind of concerns of equality, of equal opportunity, of justice, of less violent world? If it all sounds very rhetorical to anyone, what about this thing that this development has to make my life happy, right? My life, not only a life equal to full-fledged accumulation of variety of gadgets. No, life where I'm subjectively content. Life in which I am, for example, many of us are teachers in universities, but we may be very frustrated precisely because whole business of teaching in universities have become, by and large, bureaucratic management exercise, right? When pandemic broke out, from many of my friends I have heard from various kind of universities, not only in this part of the world, also in the first world, that there was almost like very blind thrusting down, a very forceful thrusting down of a, a control plan or management plan to every teacher, that you have to manage the classes somehow, right? You have to manage the classes with the same old kind of courses that you were teaching before pandemic broke out, so and so forth. In that kind of situation, or even in other walk of life, I mean, I hear from friends who are in the business of advertising, friends who are in the business of entertainment industry, that this is a serious complaint they have, that there may be plenty of facilities and there may be a very good service industry out there which is ready to offer us at certain kind of price. If I have purchasing power, I can purchase that facility, but that does not guarantee contentment. That does not guarantee that I will have this fast disappearing thing called trust, right? I may have a service provider, but do I have trust? I may have people around me, but do I have a friend? I may have colleagues around me, but do I have an intellectual partner, right? I may have peers around me, but that does not guarantee that those peers would not be bullies, right? They will be bullies. They will be academic Brahmins who would always want me to stay as some kind of academic dalit who just receives instructions just because they know how to read out the rule book and manipulate with the rule book and create techno legal hassles for others, right? So here the point is that yes, progress will happen. There will be all kind of advancement. There will be all kind of standards coming into picture. But those standards, that progress also does not stop us. Those who are fighting against the crusades of crusades, which would minimize or which would outdo the idea of ordinary. We are fighting against them precisely because we know that all these developmentalism mindset with progress, all these would not stop me or would not stop anyone who is ready to reflect, who is ready to do critical self-reflection and recognizing as to what all is happening with me in day-to-day life and how to really make sense of those things.
Thank you so much, sir. That was a lovely answer again. So I would like to conclude my questionnaire, the formal questionnaire, with the last question of this evening. If the pandemic would not have happened, would you still try to frame this upcoming nonfiction of yours in the present framework? I mean, if not so, then why?
No. Certainly, it was actually framed much before pandemic happened. There was no sign of pandemic when it was framed, right? Pandemic last year when it broke out first time in the so-called first world, And since I mean, like others, we have been following before it really was declared an issue in our part of the world. We were following the news, and we realized that something is coming. It's really not going to be short-lived. It is going to be very threatening. That was only an affirmation of what was being explored in this book. The frame of the book, the content of the book came into existence before that. So there is absolutely no sign, pandemic or no pandemic. This question is a question of our lifetime. And this question has amused other scholars as well. But my personal other scholars is that they get lost in the language in which we are more conversant. We all have this tendency to get carried away by what we know, right? We know some of those very prized things that we have learned through our training. We know about those sophisticated theories, right? I remember one of the reviewers, anonymous reviewers commissioned by the publisher of this book, suggested me that present a good theoretical trajectory of approaches to ordinary in this book, which I vehemently opposed, because that was not the intention behind this book. In original format, there was no intention to even give footnotes in this book. There was no intention to give any bibliography in this book. But as the time passed and my publisher requested, and I also realized that some of those who would look for the references might feel at loss. So I, as an afterthought, I added some of those significant references, which are always at the back of my mind, and which might also help some kind of readers. But the point was that not to get carried away by what I know and what I value as an academic, as a scholar. Instead, allow these materials which I see all around me, which I see in the poetic expressions of the poets, in fictional expressions of the fiction writers, which I see in the works of cinema makers, which I see even in the works of scholars. So I try to put them together here, and I try to put them together along with the anecdotes that I've heard from other ordinary fellows, as well as my own experiences. So I put them all together. Certain accounts are also fictionalized partially, so that it becomes more convincing, so that it communicates the drama of ordinary as we encounter them in day-to-day life. So this book would have happened even otherwise, irrespective of pandemic or with pandemic. Pandemic only reaffirmed this idea.
Thank you so much, sir. Thank you, sir, for your lovely answers to my questions. So now we'll take the questions that were posted by some of our viewers. First, we take Asmal Husna. She asks you, is this book planned out in the background of the corona pandemic, which you have already answered us? And her second question is, while presenting the ordinariness, have you focused on celebrating ordinary things of life? Or you have pointed towards how ordinary gets lost in the idea of doing out of the box these days?
Yeah, so second part of question, Asma, thanks a lot. Asma is based in Dhaka. She's one of our students, actually, very bright, very thoughtful student. Thank you, Asma, for this. The second part of the question, I will quickly respond to it. Actually, by referring to some of those things when I was talking about truth claims, I also tried suggesting that, some of those ordinary things are in the core of this book. So while reading it, the criticism of ordinary getting lost or just celebration of ordinary is not the point. That will be very facile thing to do. So the book does not just celebrate, it also criticizes ordinary great deal, because as I told you that the purpose is to see the mask, evaluate the mask. It does not shy away from hinting the judgment, not necessarily passing the value judgment, because once you pass the judgment, it's irreversible. So it does not passes the judgment. Instead, it hints certain kind of judgment. It's entirely up to a reader which judgment you pick up. And as I said, some of those judgments are also not necessarily my judgment. Those are the judgments I have heard from other people. So they're presented as provisional formulations with good detailing of ordinary things, as you have mentioned. So yeah, Asma.
Thank you, sir. We have another question from Bhavesh Pant. He says, while visioning to decipher the ordinariness, are we visioning to have a neo phenomenological turn in scholarship?
Thank you, Bhavesh. Another very intelligent question, I should say. Uh, Bhavesh, there was a phenomenological turn. You're saying neo-phenomenological probably because in our part of the world, in South Asia, it looks like phenomenology is only something to be taught in the classroom. It's not practiced in scholarship. Therefore, you're thinking in terms of neo-phenomenological turn. No, the phenomenological turn which came in scholarship all over the world, it has been fully well utilized in other part of the world, but unfortunately, social scientists in South Asia are so deeply positivist that they have never been able to make sense of phenomenology as far as their practices are concerned. They might teach some bit of phenomenology reduced into 5 bullet points in the classroom, but you know what? They have really not figured out as to really understand the significance of phenomenology in the practices of research, in the practices of writing, also in our practices of all right. So in that wake of absence of praxeology, making phenomenology a praxis, in that absence, probably Bhavesh, you can say that there is a neo phenomenological turn, but no, that's not the purpose. I mean, I'm not giving that big uh, uh, slogan chanting kind of thing that what now on let's have a new phenomenological turn. No, that's not the purpose at all here. Not in this book. That I might when I change my mask and I pretend to be an inscrutable scholar. In with that kind of mask, I can offer something which will probably deal with the idea of phenomenological turn. But phenomenological turn happened to my mind long time ago. It's unfortunate that in scholarly practices, in academic practices, this is yet to find expression in our part of the world.
Thank you, sir.
But there are
Uh,
exceptions, even in our part of the world, there are exceptions, Bhavesh, and there is need to look at those exceptions instead of, lamenting about an utter absence of phenomenological engagement.
Okay, sir. Thank you so much. Uh, Here we have another Farshid Mirzada. He has actually texted us, but he has a related question. The point of saying lies are more powerful than truths is so interesting to me, at least. Honestly, I totally agree. On the other hand, as Dr. Dev says, that we are always ready to hear the love story, for example, as truth, and never will be enough to say, I do not want to hear the truth anymore. I believe that the feeling of joy and hunger to hear the truth is because of the power of lie, because it is the conflict between the lie and the truth that makes us feel such enjoyment. So it may not be a question, but he wants to know what you think about it.
No, it's Farshid, very nice of you, very insightful observation. By and large, I concur with this observation in the sense that one has to go into. Farshid, you're from Afghanistan. Probably one has to explore the narrative traditions of Afghanistan and see as to how interplay of truth and lie takes place in abundance in those narratives. Our narrative tradition offers us great deal of exemplars. Unfortunately, we have not utilized them methodologically, and that's what I ask my students whenever I teach them methodology course, to explore the local narratives and figure out as to what kind of methodological claims are being made. which means what kind of ways of being are on offer, what those ways of seeing lead us to, whether they lead us to truth, partial lie, quasi truth, successor science, full science. So that's the whole project that we are all, Farshid and many of these young scholars would probably be my partner in future to explore this furthermore and figure out as to how variety of narratives from all over the world would give us plenty of example about developing some other notion of truth in relation with lies.
Thank you so much, sir. So, at Mask Factor, we discuss new perspectives in each episode. So, thanks a lot, Dev, sir, again. And thank you for this very insightful
Thank you.
conversation and also for your time this evening. So, to everyone, let me put a reminder. Tell
Thank
me
you.
your story calls for submissions on Mask. Uh, and registrations are open for the writing program season 2 with the story prompt of women's silence, which is yet another form of mask. We hope to hear from you. And till then, let us all try to stay well, stay safe, and though distanced, let us stay together. Good night.
Good night. Thank you, Ankita, and thank you. Tell me your story for giving me this honor of talking about this book. Thank you.